You're watching BCTV, Brantford's community access station.
This is BCTV, Brantford Government Television, a service of Brantford Community Television. The following program is brought to you through the support of the Town of Brantford.
We're going to start our meeting tonight for the Planning, Conservation and Development. My name is Phil Carloni. I'm chairing the steering committee, and I'm just quickly going to go around and ask everyone on the steering committee to just introduce themselves quickly, so you may know some folks on the committee.
My name is John Lust. I'm on the Planning and Zoning Commission for 16 years.
Vinny Antruck, I live down near Brantford Point.
Barbara Riccozzi, I live near Hotchkiss Grove.
Marcy Paluzzi, I'm on the planning and zoning. I live near the center of town.
I'm Kevin Renz, and I'm in the center of town.
I'm Glenn Shalder. I'm the consultant working with the steering committee on updating the plan.
I'm Kathy Leeson. I'm on the Economic Development Commission, and I live in Short Beach.
Peter Basserman, Inland Wetland Commission, off Leeds Island Road.
Phil Horn, I live on Pleasant Point Road.
Harry Smith, I'm the town planner. I live in the town center.
Joe Chadwick, Planning and Zoning. I live in Town Center.
Terry Elton, I'm staff in Town Hall.
Rich Stecker, staff Planning and Zoning.
Okay, so we've called the meeting to order. I'm now going to turn the meeting over to our consultant, Glenn Shalder, and he's going to talk about give us an overview of our meeting and how we're going to work things today.
Well, greetings, everybody. Thank everybody on the committee and from the public for coming. Our goal tonight is to talk through conservation-related strategies or potential conservation-related strategies for the plan of conservation and development. We have additional listening sessions scheduled on January 24th to talk about development-related issues for the plan, and then on February 6th to talk about infrastructure-related issues for the plan. So tonight is focused only on the topics related to conservation. It's a listening session. There are boards and agencies in town that are working. Their scope, their responsibilities include conservation-related issues. We've invited them to the meeting to give us thoughts and feedback and input for the plan. Also, in preparation for today's meeting, Planometrics prepared some briefing books. These are on file on the town website, and there is a PowerPoint that I've brought with me here tonight. The PowerPoint is not intended for the committee or for members of the public to be able to read it, but just to make sure that we're all on the right page, so that when we're talking about something, if it's relevant to a part of the plan, I will try to get the PowerPoint presentation, if you will, to that page, so we all know we're looking at and reading the right thing. Our purpose tonight is to go through the 5 booklets, one of which is 4A. Booklet 4A is Protect Natural Resources. Booklet 4B is Preserve Open Space. Booklet 4C is Address Coastal Issues. Booklet 4D is Promote Community Character. And Booklet 4E is Promote Sustainability and Resiliency. Since these booklets summarize some of the strategies from the current plan and some updates based on work that the town has been doing in the last 10 years, the 5-year review from the Planning and Zoning Commission in terms of what they've done, what current practices are in the state of Connecticut on some of these issues, we're starting to lay out some possible strategies for the plan going forward. At this time, these workbooks are definitely Planometrics work products for discussion. They're briefing books to get everybody on the committee talking to decide if this is a reasonable framework for Brantford moving forward. So I think the operative phrase today is this a reasonable approach for us? If there's things that you think that should be in here that are not, this would be a very opportune time to bring that up. If there are things that are in here you think perhaps should not be, this is a very opportune time to bring that up. I think some of the issues in these booklets could be talkers and take some time. And maybe what we do is we identify what those are, and we push those off, and we deal with those at a separate meeting where we may need to consider those with some other issues. Our goal tonight, if we can, is to identify things that we're favor in terms of the conservation-related strategies, things that we may not favor, and establish a basic framework moving forward. Any questions in terms of our goals for tonight's meeting or the workbooks or anything else? I think what I would suggest, Mr. Chairman, is that members of the different boards and commissions have been asked to come tonight and to give them an opportunity to summarize, if you will, the strategies that they think that Brantford should be considering moving forward. Sound like a plan?
Sounds like a plan. So do we have a order that we want to call the groups forward?
I don't think we have any particular order, so we've got a list, Glenn.
Yeah, I'm looking for my, it's always the last place you look. So I think I put this list together alphabetically. So the first group on the list that was invited here today was for the Brantford Land Trust. Is there anybody here? I think we had an email from the Brantford Land Trust. The gentleman who was supposed to be the speaker was starting to come down with a flu-related situation, and he suggested that it might be best if he was not here tonight.
So nobody from the Land Trust here that wants to speak at this point?
They did submit.
They did submit we have a letter.
Correct. If permission is summarized in the quickly. Again, thank you for the opportunity to respond. Since its founding 50 years ago, the Trust has acquired and now manages more than 950 acres of various types of land in Brantford. In addition, they protected an additional 800 acres of open space with the town and the state, and holds conservation easements on a lot of property as well. The Land Trust supports the different kinds of open space and recommendations that were in the 2008 Plan of Conservation and Development, and that Plan of Conservation and Development was based on the 2005 Open Space Plan. The plan has helped the Branford Land Trust in terms of acquiring property in sensitive areas, creating trail systems to interconnect properties. These are some of the recommendations in the 2008 Plan of Conservation and Development. Further opportunities exist to protect environmentally valuable areas, including those with wetland resources. They are aware of and sensitive to the changing environmental conditions in terms of sea level rise and climate change and what that's going to mean in terms of open space preservation, et cetera. They recognize that sea level rise was an emerging issue in the 2008 POCD, and now we think it needs to be elevated, if you will, in terms of importance, and particularly because almost 300 acres of land that they're involved in is tidal wetland and also in a coastal area and focus. On page 2 of their report, they have 2 specific suggestions for the Plan of Conservation and Development. Number 1 is improve stormwater quality to protect wetlands, marshes, and other undeveloped open spaces that provide defenses against flooding. And this strategy is discussed in the Natural Resources Booklet 4A. And the second major recommendation is to correct and update the open space map. And again, this was one of the recommendations in the 2008 Plan of Conservation and Development, and that's discussed in Booklet 4B in terms of open space.
Okay.
Another invited group, the next was Community Forest Commission. Thank you.
Where do you want me to stand?
I think that's,
Right here?
I think that's the best. Thank you.
All right. All right, so I'm Shirley McCarthy. I've been the chair of the Community Forest Commission, or CFC, since 2009. And since there are 3 of us, which we will quickly talk, I'll get right into what we are requesting. 1, the CFC be notified of new or revised site developments, both residential and commercial, so as to be included in the planning phases to ensure A, adequate plantings, native whenever possible, because it benefits our dwindling wildlife. and the right tree for the right place. B, preservation of mature, valuable trees, especially important in the number of projects we have going with TOD, Walsh, Community House Senior Center, and a lot of you know about the crisis that occurred because ginkgo was overlooked. And so adequate early involvement by the CFC would preempt those problems. 2, the CFC will develop a comprehensive tree planting program to be adopted by the town so as to replace the canopy that has been lost through natural causes and overzealous utility company pruning and cutting. Brantford has suffered a net loss of mature trees since the first POCD, which needs to be corrected. Thirdly, boards, commissions serving on our town become familiar with the abundant scientific evidence that shows that trees, greenscape, have profound economic, social, physical, and mental health benefits for our residents. City trees and green space are important to public health. They are not just a luxury and should be given more attention in planning and development. That is why this group at the University of Washington put together a 100-page literature review on the scientific evidence of the public health and economic crime impact of trees. I've produced a few factoids for you in the paper I gave you, but I've also summarized it in a 3-page list of facts on the impact of trees on our health and well-being for anybody that would like it. So let me just tell you a couple of facts that I found interesting. In one large study, elderly people that had nearby parks, tree-lined streets, and space for taking walks showed higher longevity over a 5-year study period. They obviously controlled for socioeconomic status and whatever. Commuting by car is a source of chronic stress. Drivers seeing natural roadside views show lower levels of stress and frustration compared to those viewing all built settings. Do your own study. Drive on the west part of US 1 in Brantford and your pulse goes up. Drive on the eastern side of US 1 here at Guilford and your pulse goes down. It's because of the green space. The World Health Organization says that chronic stress and lack of exercise are the 2 largest contributors to premature death in humans in developed nations. You can do something about chronic stress if you think more about trees and other things, obviously. Here's another factoid. A study of 101 public high schools found consistent and systematically positive relationships between nature exposure and student performance and behavior. Views from cafeteria and classroom windows with greater quantities of trees and shrubs were associated with more positive standardized test scores, graduation rates, percentage of students planning to attend a 4-year college, and fewer occurrences of criminal behavior. However, those who looked out at landscape that lacked natural features such as big lawns, athletic fields, or parking lots had negative factors in their scores and measures.
Can I ask you a question? Oh,
yeah.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I got 2 more factoids if I have time. There's a lot, but obviously developers can recover their costs when they save trees on lots. Wooded lots go for more, they're assessed for more. Brantford gets higher taxes as a result. And finally, shoppers will spend 9 to 12% more time in a shopping district that has a good canopy of trees and will drive further. Yeah. Oh, I just have to show you this one graph because this says it all. But I want everybody to see it. All right, so in this study of architects and psychologists, you want to hold it? Okay. So architects and psychologists subjected 120 people to a stressor, and that was a videotape of work-related accidents. And obviously their systolic blood pressure went up, which is an indicator of stress, as did other parameters. And then subgroups were subjected to videos of traffic, pedestrian, mall, or nature. And those that looked at a video of nature or greenscape, their blood pressure recovered the quickest. There's no question that greenscape and trees can improve public health. Thank you.
Just a quick question for you.
Yeah.
issue of trees is addressed in the materials that have been prepared for the commission. The challenge that I have had in terms of organizing this for the committee is that is trees a natural resource issue or a community character issue? And I realize it's both. But where do you think that discussion might best or most intuitively be located so that people can find it easily in the future?
It's a good question. Any of my colleagues want to chime in? I would say natural resource.
And I would say community character. But that's the way good committees operate. You have slight differences of opinion.
Oh, and this is Louise LaMontagne, and she will be chair of the tree commission starting mid-January.
So I just had a couple of things to answer, and it's somewhat pertinent to your question. I today looked at the briefing booklet 4D, section 4D, and I isolated just a couple things I wanted to talk about. One is on page 7, section B, note E and F. E and F have to do with planning for putting trees in proposed development. And I note that this part is crossed out. I know that we didn't get into this game until this point, but I don't know why it was crossed out, and I'd like it to be uncrossed out. Because one of our big challenges and desires and plans is to be more involved at an early stage in development so that these horrible things don't happen, as we've all seen happen. And finally, I don't know if this would be easy for you to do, and probably not, but on the 4D, the first page, just what you see there, but 4D, you have two pictures at the bottom. One is possible character asset, and it's a beautiful picture of a water scene with mature trees. The sun is shining, the water is blue, and next to it is possible character liability, and it basically shows an exaggeratedly bad version of West Main Street in Brantford. And what I want to point out is even how bad that is. If you added in appropriate vegetation, including mature trees, it would look a lot better. And that's basically what we're hoping for you to do. Thank you.
Thank you.
And your blood pressure will go down.
Right.
Alphabetically, the next group on the list is Conservation Commission. Anybody here from Conservation?
Our tree warden has one thing to say.
Oh, on?
Okay.
Yeah, this would be a great time. Yes, thank you. I'm sorry.
Just very briefly, one thing that I think we need to do is to plan for trees up front. We need to consider that they're living things, that they're not architectural features. So when we're looking at what we want to do with them, we want to make sure that they have space that they need, that they're being maintained, they're installed properly. We have a very small budget in Branford for that. There is one budget, and that's what we use for everything. So the budget is very limited, but in projects, especially that go to zoning, it would be good to plan. They need more than a 2 by 2 foot space, which is what you see on Main Street. So that is the main thing that I think that we need to consider for that. And then long-term maintenance. Would you mind, I'm also the wetland person, could I just speak to that very quickly?
Sure.
Okay. I submitted a document on the tree warden. I just submitted today a document on wetlands, so I'm not going to go into a lot of this. So the Wetland Commission is a regulatory commission, so when we consider protecting wetlands, we're required to follow the Connecticut General Statute. Then it's very limited what we can do. Wetlands are really important, and I've documented some of those reasons. It's best if we can get ahead of that, and maybe zoning could incorporate more consideration into their requirements to protect wetlands. They need the uplands to protect them, otherwise you end up with just mud holes. So I think that when you expect the Wetland Commission to protect the wetlands, that's a really limited expectation. So I think that needs to be considered in planning, considered by zoning if possible, just, you know, more of an overall consideration rather than just doing it under the regulatory authority. That's it.
Thank you. Did that get to Harry, the written submittal?
Yes.
Okay, so we'll get that to
I
you.
think I just
Just
gave it
came
to you.
tonight.
Yeah,
Oh.
I distributed as many copies.
It's right in front of me. I apologize. Thank you very much. Yep. Next was the Conservation Commission. Anybody here from Conservation Commission? Yep. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Dan Fitzgerald. I've been a commissioner on the Environment Conservation Commission for going on 2 years now. We just have about 4 points that we'd like to raise for the consideration here. The first one's the need to address the sea level rise. We're a coastal community, and sea level rise will continue to impact us. Short-term strategy should publicly identify areas that will be impacted, so mitigation plans can be developed. Current Brantford maps only display projected impact areas shaded in colors, so we just want to actually define the list of items and places so the communities can be aware of this. So the goal really is to identify areas of immediate impact with sea level rise and begin to develop mitigation plans with the surrounding communities so they can be part of that plan. Another point here is salt marsh conservation. To reduce, we really want to reduce development near the marshes and allow for future expansion. Given that sea level rise is going to continue, we would like to the PDOC to address the expansion or development of marshes when appropriate. The goal here is to continue to conserve salt marshes and consider the expansion of these salt marshes as sea levels rise. Another point here is consider development of microgrid for Brantford and other shoreline towns, or a part of one. There's a great progress been made at Block Island with wind, which has eliminated the use of fossil fuel generators there. The project was so successful, new projects such as Revolution Wind are being considered in Massachusetts. Given Brantford's coastline, we should investigate methods of renewable energy that can be conducted locally. And really, the goal here is to reduce the reliance on the current power grid, given all the storms that we've had, and potentially produce enough energy to sell back to the grid. And our final point here to make is the open access waters for kayaking or other small non-powered watercraft. Public access for kayaks is limited in Brantford despite our proximity to the water. As new development is conducted, such as the Boardwalk at Stony Creek Brewery, please consider adding kayak areas that can accommodate easy load, unloading, as well as parking. And the goal here is to provide kayak access to the shore that is less cumbersome than is currently available.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Hey, committee members have any questions along the way, certainly go ahead and throw those in. Flood and Erosion Control Board? Brantford Green Committee.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is David Minicozy, and I'm the chairman of the Brantford Green Committee. Been chairman for about 3 years now. Brantford Green Committee is legally charged with advising the Board of Selectmen on the flora that are on the green, but we also regard ourselves as guardians and overseers of the green. And we interface in that regard with Department of Public Works, Park and Rec, First Selectman, Diana Ross, the tree warden, and a number of other municipal boards and persons to oversee and watch out for the green and maintain its improvements. So we're composed of 9 members, myself, Don Gentile, we are the at-large members, and then there are 7 other members that represent the 3 churches on the green, the Historical Society, the Chamber of Commerce, and the Garden Club. So I have my summary that I presented to Glenn about a week ago, and I'm just going to read through that and summarize. So some of the new issues that we'd like to be considered with the POCD is that there has been a marked increase in the use of the green over the past 10 years. We obtained the applications for green use from the First Selectman's office, and the number of users of the green, the festivals, the events on the green have markedly increased. So a lot more traffic, foot traffic and use, that type of thing. We're concerned about the impact on the green by certain modernizing projects, such as the proposed roundabout, the transit-oriented development that's occurring, and the Main Street Gateway project and others. So we're not opposed to these things. We're just concerned that it's going to bring a lot more traffic to the green and on and about the green, and that will continue to create changes and add pressure to the green. Parking on and about the green and the degradation by motor vehicles. We've recently obtained a report, a Cornell-sponsored report that's presented to us by the town arborist, Care of Trees, that indicates that parking on the green should be forbidden in terms of like the parking in back of the church during the Brantford Festival and other festivals, and any other vehicles should not be on the green because it causes soil compaction and will have a tendency to degrade or kill the trees that are on the green. We have a number of championship trees that are in danger because of this type of use of the green. Also, there's going to be the redesign of the treescape along Main Street. They're going to be replacing the trees from down by where Cheese End is all the way up to the 4th Ward is my understanding. And so they're going to be replacing the trees along the green, and we would like to be part of that and help oversee that project. We're also concerned with utilities cutting back the trees on an ad hoc basis. I was driving by the green one day and Eversource was out there hacking back the trees along South Main Street, and I stopped them and had a talk with them about that, and they understand we were concerned. So we just want to have a better relationship with the utilities to make sure that if they're going to do this type of thing, we need to give prior notice of it. And in general, just the forces of the modern world pressing down on the green is a concern of ours. New strategies, one of them would be to develop wayfinding materials to direct the public to parking and restrooms and other facilities away from but adjacent to the green. Interact with utilities, as I previously mentioned. Coordinate and develop the improvement projects on and about the green. Avoid environmental impact of the development projects and other improvements, as I previously noted. Perhaps improve and upgrade what I call the furniture on the green. That's the benches, trash receptacles. Restrooms was a big deal last year, try to get better public restrooms on the green. And in other words, tie them in to develop a general theme so everything looks the same. Recognize that the green is a public park and an asset to be managed in a modern and cohesive fashion, and to adopt a policy of what I call observational vigilance. Basically, if you see something, say something. If you see people parking on the green, say something about it. As for recommendations, going back to the 2008 POCD, and I'm quoting the language on page 70, maintain the town center as the heart and soul of the community by making more sensible use of the green. The prior POCD used the word effective. I think sensible is a better word. And consolidating responsibility for green use and maintenance. And that's directly from the old POCD. Encourage projects and maintenance which enhance the innate historic charm and nature of the green, while at the same time preserving and maintaining its bucolic state. And we should also recognize that keeping green in its current state, other than certain upgrades and maintenance, is to be valued over and above any policies to improve or modernize the green. The green is a public park, and what makes it charming is its current state. That's why people love the green. So our position is that to upgrade it and to modernize it should not be done. Redo sidewalks, plant trees, but that takes me to my next topic, which is recommendations that are no longer relevant or should be removed. It's our position that we should jettison or severely curtail the so-called town green plan, which was mentioned in the POCD back in 2008, page 70. That's the so-called master plan. Okay, I know that there was an uproar when that came out. I believe there was a big meeting at the Blackstone Library where people turned out against it. And it's our policy that that plan should be either jettisoned or curtailed severely, and avoid at all costs the continued reduction in the green's footprint and degradation of the green's nature and character. Thank you very much.
Historical Society?
Good afternoon. My name is Matt Radulski. I'm president of the Bradford Historical Society, and I'll be one of the more popular speakers today. We submitted a written statement. I'll let those words stand for what they are, and we'll continue to be involved with this development. Thank you.
Yeah,
It's not in the pack.
I think we're going to ask you to resubmit that. We're looking through our papers here, and nobody seems to have that in front of them, so thank you for your brevity. Thank you very much. Inland Wetlands Commission. Oh, I'm sorry, we did Inland Wetlands. Parks and Open Space Authority.
Hi, I'm Judy Miller, and I'm speaking for Ainsley Hyman, who's the chair of the authority. And just for the sake of the people who are here, we basically are advising that we continue the same mandate that was described in the previous Plan of Conservation and Development. Since 1971, the authority has had the power to regulate, manage, control, and maintain such areas as are designated open space and park areas by the Board of Selectmen. It should be noted that Parks and Open Space only does management and is not directly involved in acquisition. We are in favor of preserving and protecting undeveloped tracts of land as designated by the Board of Selectmen, and we advocate continuing the goals as described in the 2008-2018 Plan of Conservation and Development to maintain the overall physical condition of the land and to enforce regulations concerning proper use and dumping. That's it. May I also just give the very brief Shoreline Greenway Trail at the same time?
Absolutely, thank you.
Again, it's very brief. We will be providing a more detailed report when it comes to infrastructure. In terms of the natural resources, the most important thing that we're doing is in terms of protecting air quality. And I noticed that in the Plan of Conservation and Development, there's a reference to air quality and idling cars. If we are going to be advocating developing better multi-use trails and also bicycle and pedestrian lanes and all kinds of access and encouragement of the use of bicycles and pedestrians, and that obviously the more you get people out of cars, the less you pollute the air in town. So that's what our report said.
Would you make sure that you submit those again by email, because we're all kind of looking at each other and nobody's got a copy of that? So
We've got the Shoreline Greenway Trail.
the Shoreline Greenway we did. I'm sorry, it was the Parks and Open
Oh,
Space.
you know, yeah, Ainsley might not have forwarded it.
That's okay. For anybody who wants to submit comments,
I will get that to you.
the email address to use is pocd@brantford-ct.gov.
Gotcha.
And that comes direct to me. So if there's any reports or anything else that you would like to submit, please do so.
But you do have the Shoreline Greenway Trail?
I do have that one, yes. Thank you so much.
Okay, very good.
Thank you.
Glenn and Harry, would it be possible if these comments that are submitted could be posted along with the booklets on the website so that people could access them, could see what different groups have submitted?
I think that...
That's up to the committee, I think, if you want to do that.
Is that we are getting correspondence, if you will, between meetings. We try to copy those for the committee members for the meetings. But I think at that point in time, we can gang them up and post them online so that people are aware of what's going on. Does that sound like a plan?
Yes.
We'll take care of that. Select Committee on Open Space?
Well, I'm the chair, so I'll just briefly go over it. The committee discussed this at the December meeting, and suggestions were to update the 2005 Open Space Plan, which is more than 10 years out of date at this point. A lot's changed. To encourage interconnectivity of existing protected open space areas, to recommend acquisition of parcels with specific features that make them valuable as open space, larger than 10 acres or abutting existing open space, for examples. Introduce zoning incentives. There is the open space residential development and the zoning regulations, but perhaps other things could be identified. Question about developing a stable base for funding acquisitions rather than having to wait until a project is upon us and then try to convince the town that it's worth spending money on. Some other towns have, I think they've sort of pre-approved bonding authorization for open space with the understanding that the money's there to be used, but it would have to come back for review by the appropriate boards. Develop recommendations for how the town can or should handle properties impacted by Sandy and Irene type storm events, especially those in floodplains. Correct inaccuracies in the open space GIS layer and develop a schedule to periodically update the GIS layer. And then they listed criteria for possible open space acquisitions, which were taken from an earlier plan of conservation and development, and mentioned what the charge and duties were for the committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Anything from Shellfish Commission?
Not at this moment, but it's basically a water quality, indicator. And we work closely. I'm the staff, only been on a couple of years, but it's a well-developed program with jurisdiction by the State Department of Agriculture, Bureau of Aquaculture, and there's recreational shellfishing permits available and different types of leases based on the jurisdiction, and also a co-management policy which helps to restock the recreational beds and the seed oysters and seed. And there's a new business. Obviously, shellfishing is doing well statewide in terms of product, and there's new opportunities for different types of shellfishing and even kelp and things of that sort. But I'll write up a report that we can list on the on the website for Plan of Conservation as well.
Mr. Chairman, those are the invited participants. I think the next on the agenda, the next part of the meeting, if you will, is for the committee to have an opportunity to discuss the briefing books and propose that we kind of go through them one by one in sequence and discuss the question whether or not we think the briefing book suggests a possible framework for Brantford moving forward. Is there anything in here that shouldn't be, or there's anything not in here that should be, or something in here which is decidedly controversial and we need to talk about it further down the road.
So you're going to walk us through these, Glenn, then, and we're...
I think at a higher level, I'd be happy to.
Okay.
So for the audience in the room and on TV, if you will, so the first booklet, they were talking about booklet number 4A, Protect Natural Resources. This is what it looks like. On the front page is sort of an overview of what we mean by the phrase natural resources overall. And then there's some background information here in the booklet in terms of particular resources. Steep slopes, stratified drift aquifer areas, water bodies, floodplains, animal habitats, etc. From the public meeting, which was held back in the fall, the possible verbs that were thrown out by the audience and protect natural resources seem to be the one that stuck the most, if you will. There is a map in this booklet which identifies the location of some of these sensitive natural resources overall in Brantford. I realize that you can't pick up all the colors from the back of the room, but the map shows the locations of water courses, wetlands, vernal pools, steep slopes, 100-year flood zones, 500-year flood zones, stratified drift aquifer areas, and then areas which are identified as natural diversity database sites. So this is a preliminary indication of areas in Brantford with particularly sensitive natural resources, and this could be a priority for us moving forward. In this section, Mr. Chairman, we've identified some possible strategies for the 2018 POCD, and so I'm just going to go through the strategic level, if you will. And on this page, for example, at the strategic level, the first natural resource recommendation is to maintain and improve water quality, and then below that there are sub-recommendations related to how we can manage development, stormwater resources, and other things to address that. The second major strategy is to address water quantity and inland flooding issues. We're seeing more intense storms than we have in the past. Our drainage systems and pipes were sized for the frequency and intensity of storms in years past. So there's possible we may have situations in the future where our infrastructure might need to be adjusted to do so. And we talk about some of those strategies here. And it's talked about here because the issue of coastal flooding and sea level rise that we've talked about earlier, we've kicked over to the section on the coastal resources, if you will. And so that follows later. There's another strategy to protect other important natural resources, steep slopes, water courses, wetlands, habitats, and air-related resources. And then finally, at the strategic level, maintain the natural resources inventory. This is a document, I believe, which was prepared back in 2003, updated in 2013. It's a good model, if you will, for us in terms of what we have for resources in town. Any thoughts from the committee as to, does it sound like a basic framework moving forward? Are there things to add, delete? What's the committee's thoughts?
Just a comment on the on page 4. There are a couple of things under maintain and improve overall water quality that were crossed out. I think B, develop more stringent water quality standards for properties along the coast. And there was a question, not sure what this means. I think it's a concern about septic systems that potentially are polluting Long Island Sound. For example, septic systems are not particularly good at removing nitrogen, which is a real problem for Long Island Sound in terms of over-fertilization and hypoxic zone generation.
Yep.
And I know that DEEP periodically does a survey along the shore to sort of test to see if they're picking up anything. I happened to be out on our little beach when they came by a year and a half ago, and they took some water samples. So there may be information from DEEP about that.
Understood. I think the challenge that I was having is how the Planning and Zoning Commission or other boards or agencies in town would implement, enforce, and manage this. Most of the water quality programs exist at the state level, and this is something that certainly we have this overall issue of protecting water quality because all the water flows to Long Island Sound. But the two issues here that were suggested that maybe they were too detailed. The number one was sewer pump out boats and other things, storm drain marking, which some of that has been done, and then these more stringent water quality standards. I felt that the enforcement mechanisms weren't there, so the strategy was good, but the detail perhaps not. You're recommending, Bill, that we leave that in?
No, I just wanted to sort of identify what I think it pertains to. And I agree that the state does a lot of the regulations, but I guess I feel like the plan of conservation and development, if it's sort of, its recommendations stand too far back, and we don't really describe what it is we're thinking about, it loses its value as being a reference document that people can go to for ideas about things that could be voluntarily done, which would help the town. I mean, it may not be something the town wants to regulate, but I think the town could be taking a leadership role in sort of laying these things out and saying that these are areas where organizations or neighborhood groups or whatever could be taking a lead on.
I think Bill brought up an excellent point here because I think the challenge on a plan of conservation and development is at what altitude the plan gets to. If it's too high and too general, it doesn't have the specificity that we need. On the other hand, if it's too detailed and too focused, we get lost. We can't see the forest because of the trees type of thing. So finding that right place for Brantford is an important part of what we do. So this type of discussion, we should have it as we go along. Too detailed, not detailed enough, and then we can find a happy place, if you will, for our plan. I think in terms of Bill's suggestions, one of the things that I think is a very effective way for us to configure the plan is to use what I call sidebars, which is a space on the page. The recommendation from 10 years ago was fairly detailed. Develop more stringent water quality standards, which is really something we don't have the ability to do. But Bill's absolutely right. The issue of water quality and nitrogen and its impact on coastal waters is significant, and we should talk about that in the sidebar and how we need to fix that. So I think we can address the issue without getting too deep into the weeds in the coastal area.
It's fun.
I couldn't resist, I'm sorry. Other thoughts in terms of natural resources?
I think the Planning and Zoning Commission could go a long way to helping that idea, because we review so many coastal site plans, and that's a perfect place to start making recommendations to people about their planting plans and how they maintain them.
Thank you.
Another comment.
Yep.
On page 5, item 3, I think we might be a little bit too specific, where we say prohibit construction of new structures or expansion within the 100-year flood zone. I think we're people have private property in there, and we either need to clarify how to do that in a way that doesn't take away their development rights, but yet still protects the needs, through the flood program.
Yep.
And I'm not sure where that balance is
You know,
maintained.
I think this discussion will come into play too as we're talking through the coastal issues, because there's an article not too long ago about FEMA's impact last year from the major storms around the country, the wildfires in California, et cetera, and how there may need to be changes in these programs, and whether or not this responsibility will fall more to the property owner, fall more to the town, or what's going to happen. So I think being flexible on this is important.
Or at least to provide options. I mean, I agree that there could be significant areas where you don't want to encourage, more development because of what might happen with sea level rise, but also, you can't, to have a blanket statement without, further study is a little bit tricky too.
Yeah, so I think we had talked at an earlier time about the importance of verbs, and I think the verb prohibit here is too strong. I think that's the message that's coming back for us. Anything else in terms of major issues or strategies on natural resources?
Well, isn't all that also in the, with the caveat that if you were in strict accordance with the National Flood Insurance Program, that prohibition would not apply? I mean, that's the way I read it. So maybe the wording could be tweaked a little bit.
I think it could be, but I think the issue is some communities are going above and beyond the National Flood Insurance Program. And so we'll talk about this a little bit later in terms of the issue of freeboard and et cetera. And should we? Some communities say, yes, we should. We need to tell people about how important this is. And other communities say, that's messing around with property rights, and we should be make sure we dovetail with federal and state policy on this, but not get too far ahead of that.
Well,
So this is where the verb's important.
I think there's logical areas where it makes sense to raise, and other logical areas where, if we have sea level rise and we can't access areas of town, that we need to let those people know that it isn't necessarily prudent to put more money into something that could potentially.
Yep. And so maybe the verb down below, which is discourage. So again, we just want to make sure that people are going into these situations with their eyes open.
Yeah, qualified.
Yep. Anything else on the natural resource booklet?
I had a question.
Absolutely.
My question is along the lines of what you addressed, but it's more to, will the recent hurricanes that we have had, will FEMA do more restrictive rules in terms of the floodplain and the flood zone? Do you have any indication if that's going to change or be revised?
That's a very difficult question to answer. FEMA is not the most nimble federal agency. The FEMA elevations are based on historic flooding and the flooding they anticipate in the next 5 years, and what we've seen in the coastal area, and perhaps is going to happen inland. The storm frequency and severity is changing. So by the time FEMA catches up to where sea level rise is, sea level will already be well past that point. And so the challenge for us is a federal flood insurance program, which is meant to provide some opportunity for property owners to gain some insurance in these sensitive areas, is going to be behind the times. And so it's a philosophical issue for us as to balance property rights versus environmental threats and et cetera.
I'll just point out, I mean, I think we're sort of talking about freshwater flooding here.
This is, yes.
So, and on the address coastal issues, right up front in the nice box on the sidebar, it talks about planning for 20 inches by 2050, which is the recommendation that's come out from the Connecticut Institute on Resilience and Coastal Adaptation. I have a copy of that report, which I'm happy to share with the commission, maybe it could be posted, that based on several different projections, sort of current trends, and then a couple of different scenarios, it all seems to cluster within fairly close to and just below a half a meter, which is 20 inches. And so they're saying for planning purposes, to be a little conservative, that town should be planning for 20-inch sea level rise by 2050.
Yeah, and I think it's important, Bill, to highlight this verb plan. We're not predicting that will happen. We're saying sea level rise appears to be occurring, and the projections are that we should plan for something of this magnitude. Just a quick question. So we decided to split up coastal flooding from inland flooding because they are slightly different. Is the commission preliminarily okay with that split? There was a suggestion in an earlier meeting, we might create an environment chapter, which might mean that all these things get thrown into that box. So just in the back of your mind, as we talk through this, keep that in your mind. Anything else on natural resources? The next booklet is about preserving open space. The first page talks a little bit about the definition of open space, and open space has different definitions for different people depending on how they want to use that term. And I think the challenge for us in Brantford is to make sure we understand what we mean by open space when we use that terminology. So the terms which are discussed here on the front page are dedicated open space, regulated open space, managed open space, temporary open space, and perceived open space. Perceived has no protection. Dedicated open space has significant protection, and in between are some other categories. So this is important for us to talk about. The second page talks about possible ways that Brantford can preserve more open space in the future, and includes purchase of land, donation of land, dedication of land at the time of development, and some other approaches, and something for us to talk about. There is a map, as was mentioned earlier. We feel that this map is close, but no cigar in terms of its accuracy, and it's something we need to continue to work on because open space is a fluid concept and we're adding land over time, et cetera.
I would just like to suggest that the committee sets a goal of having this map up to date by the time we publish.
Wow. There you go.
It can be done.
It can be.
It's not that many properties that have to be added.
So building on some of the testimony that we heard earlier, so the major strategies for the suggested for discussion are to review and update the 2005 open space plan. I think we heard that tonight in our testimony. The second one is to improve our open space acquisition tools, and again, we heard that tonight, whether it's funding in the annual budget, whether it's a bonding type of approach, or other types of ways that we can make sure that we have the best tools in the toolbox for preserving open space. Third major strategy is to improve open space planning and management. This is updating our inventory and updating our mapping to make sure that we have good information available. And also to identify what our desired uses are of different open space parcels. Which ones are really for habitat preservation and perhaps minimal touch, if you will, and which ones are decidedly public access and use and intensity, so that we make the most effective use. Next major recommendation is to improve open space maintenance. So once we know what we want to do with the parcel, what do we need to do in terms of making that happen? And then the last one is seeking to preserve private open space overall. And this is reasons why people might keep land undeveloped or use it in a gentle way that enhances sort of the overall community. And this one, again, private open space gets us into a fuzzy category, and maybe this section actually goes to the community character section of the plan. Thoughts? I think the major recommendation, I think, on open space here in a sense is to kind of refresh, if you will, our open space approach. I think from our research and investigation, it seems like the town has good organizations in place to address this issue, but the open space plan itself is 2005, which is 13 years old. The criteria probably makes sense for us to revisit that with some of the other issues going on in the plan, and also to try to update our mapping so we have an up-to-date inventory of where we're at. And I think with that, I think Brantford would be in good shape moving forward. Other thoughts on the open space framework? Does it sound like it makes some sense for us? Other things to add, subtract, delete? Good?
Just a comment, Glenn, on the bottom of page 4, there's a box question, should the plan map potentially desirable open space properties? I think that the map in the 2008 POCD dealt with this pretty well. The properties that had been identified by the Select Committee on Open Space Acquisition as having potential open space value for the town were outlined along with wetlands as being valuable, valuable resources, but they weren't identified as potential acquisitions.
And this may be a situation, I think Bill's challenge, if you will, to have the open space inventory up to date by the time this plan is adopted would be a great step forward for us. Some communities believe that having the properties designated creates conflict, if you will, and we shouldn't be doing that. Some other communities believe and have found that having the properties designated actually improves their eligibility for grants and other funding to preserve the open space. So finding that happy middle ground is really appropriate for each community to decide what it feels best. But this might be something that when they update the 2005 open space plan, they deal with it there, and the POCD might not get into that issue because that may take some time to resolve. The next booklet is booklet 4C, which is address coastal issues. This certainly, I think, is a challenging issue for a community like Brantford. As the maps have shown at this point in time, we're wider than we are deep, so that our coastal area, in terms of the community with our bays, inlets, rivers, etc., is certainly a significant issue here overall. When we think about the coastal area, oftentimes our view or vision is what's in the bottom left corner on the front, this idyllic waterfront scene, and probably on an average of 1% of the time each year we can have a coastal storm which produces the other picture. And so trying to figure out what we should be doing in this particular situation is certainly something for us to be talking about. Brantford is very fortunate. They've had some very good work done in terms of the coastal resilience plan, really looking at our vulnerability. And vulnerability is a function of both risk and frequency of storm event. What's at risk and how often is it at risk? So we've got a good basic framework moving forward in terms of sea level rise, climate change, flooding, etc. And I think the challenge for us as a community is how to begin to focus on these particular things. There is a map in this plan that identifies what we call the coastal boundary, the areas which are within identified coastal management area, if you will, areas which are subject to flooding. The coastal resilience plan looked at the possibilities for flooding intensity and activity in different parts of the community at different time frames or on different storm events. There's a wonderful tool online at coastalresilience.org which allows anybody on the computer, if you will, to look at individual properties or areas in some detail and do that. I think the challenge for Brantford moving forward is how we could possibly address the numerous issues which exist. I think if I remember correctly from the study, there were 23 roads that needed to have some level of improvement or elevation. And those projects are not inexpensive. And so we already use our budget to fund services and facilities we want. Where is this money going to come from? How can we possibly accommodate it all? So I've been going to some seminars on coastal issues. I think the issue or the challenge for us going forward is that when it comes to road and utility infrastructure, people in town require or rely on the town for addressing this particular issue. But there comes a point in time that if we had a mile of road to one house, you would say to yourself as a municipality, perhaps it doesn't make sense for us to continue to maintain this road. Well, what is that decision framework and how do we get there? We can't decide it today or tonight, but I do think over the next short period, years, months, we probably need to start having a conversation about what framework we're going to have as we go forward. Because if we put dollar cost to all of these issues, I don't think that we can do them all. But roads and utility infrastructure are clearly, I think, something that falls within the town's purview. The next area is sort of the neighborhoods that we have in our community. The neighborhoods and some of these neighborhood associations have neighborhood assets. There's beaches, there's improvements in certain situations, private roads, etc. What happens with these entities and how should they approach this issue? And we need to be teammates with them in terms of helping them figure out this type of situation. And there may be things where the town doesn't necessarily get involved in the mechanics of this, but the neighborhood associations might. And figuring out what those are is, again, something we should have a dialogue on.
I would suggest there that something should at least alert people that DEEP's Office of Long Island Sound Projects has a lot to say about those kinds of activities. So that the neighborhood associations don't think that they can just sort of decide to build a seawall.
No, I understand. It's certainly one of the more, I was going to say contentious, but it's a very active issue. And then the last issue, I think, or at the individual property owner level, is what does a property owner do on their property? The town is not going to step in and elevate somebody's building or do other types of things. But the question is, what obligations or responsibilities fall to the private property owners? So the framework, if you will, for this discussion moving forward is that the town should have a cogent strategy in place for this. The strategic recommendations in the plan, number one, is to protect the coastal resources, all of the things that make our coastal area special in town. They're well stated in the Coastal Management Act. We should continue those efforts. Number two is maintain and enhance coastal access. The fact that people can get to the water, both visually, both in person and boat launches, is one of the things that makes Brantford such a unique place and the experiences that we have. It gets harder from here. So the recommendation right now in the plan is establish a framework for addressing sea level rise. And this has to do with the whole issue of coastal resilience, storm frequency, and intensity. And I think rather than the plan try to solve this issue, the plan essentially recommends is that we incorporate the coastal resilience plan work that's been done so far into the POCD as a baseline information. And then the second recommendation on this page, this is on page 10 of the booklet, is to establish a coastal vulnerability working group. And I think that this is to advance the work that's been done in town, which identified the multitude of issues, and establish a framework moving forward. What might the town be prepared to undertake? What might property owners be expected to undertake? And what might the neighborhood associations undertake? And what should our framework be? Because we're talking millions of dollars, tens of millions, hundreds of millions, I don't know. But if the projection for sea level rise is to plan for 20 inches by 2050, 20 inches is 20 inches. And so that becomes an issue for us to begin to think about our approach. If we wait too long, this curve is going to be steep. If we start now and establish a framework and refine it as we go, I think it could give us the ability to address this moving forward. So those are the major recommendations in the coastal booklet at this point in time. What's the committee's thought on the booklet? Reasonable framework moving forward?
Good start.
Yep. Booklet 4D has to do with promoting community character. Community character is an ephemeral concept that means different things to different people. So this becomes a situation, there's a lot of items identified in here. So page 2 of the booklet identifies things that generally tend to have a positive correlation to people's perception of community character. And then the map on page 3 identifies where these resources are located in town. The open space areas, the coastal area, some of the scenic views, the historic districts, a lot of the things in town that lower people's blood pressure. So these are the positive steps. The next page deals with some of the things that sometimes aggravate people and might detract from community character. And so there's a map on page 5 which identifies the location of some of these areas. And these are sort of our busier roads where traffic impacts and people wish that other people would get out of their way, or the appearances, or you may recall from the public meeting the prouds and sorries in terms of where the dots ended up in the map. And so these are areas that perhaps we might want to be a little bit more sensitive or careful to, or not. What should our approach or a program be? Basic framework which is proposed in the Plan of Conservation and Development for discussion. The first one is to look at enhancing our design review process. We currently have village districts in place in the downtown area in Stony Creek, and we could expand this to other areas and businesses and uses in town. And recommending this in the POCD could be a place to start if we wanted to address that. Another major recommendation is to preserve and enhance Brantford's scenic features. These are the resources, the distinctive landscapes, coastal area, scenic views, and things that we have. To recognize these as part of approvals and other things. Enhance the scenic character of roadways. The plan suggests it might be useful for us to consider undertaking a branding and wayfinding program. This builds on what was in the TOD study, which is we're all Brantford, well, not we, I'm not. You're all Brantford residents. You know how to get around. But the issue is the community is not intuitive for somebody who doesn't live here. You're not sure what exit to get off, where to go, which way to go. How do you get to the town center from 95? I mean, I could have a conversation. If I said, I'll meet you in the center, where would you go? And so there used to be welcome to Brantford signs in town. And it has occurred to me that that might be something for us to think about as community-based projects for the future, which reinforce when somebody comes to town and they have a destination in mind and they have it in their GPS, they're going to that place and then they're probably leaving. But if there's a wayfinding sign that says, hey, Stony Creek Brewery over here, and they didn't know about it, or Short Beach over there, or something else, we can actually leverage their time in the community in a positive way. So there's some examples, if you will, of what some other communities have done in terms of wayfinding. We do have the Stony Creek Quarry, and so building that pink granite into our identification scheme could be something for us to think about. And we could also undertake changeable event notices. We do some great events in Brantford. So some communities have gone so far as the LED signage that is a changing message, if you will. And I'm not suggesting we go that far, but it's effective, if you will, to identify. I'm just saying.
How you recover is going to be key.
On the next page, we talk about protecting historic resources in town, and the importance of those resources to our character. There's also a recommendation on this page that encouraging retention of undeveloped land. This is the Public Act 490 process, which allows a landowner who meets certain criteria to receive a reduced assessment and pay less taxes, which means the pressure to develop their property is reduced. If the land is cheaper to own, people are more likely to keep it. If the taxes go up, there comes a point in time they say, you know what? And that's why back in 1963, the state of Connecticut enabled the Public Act 490 program. Because taxes, increasing taxes, were causing people to put land into development, which is starting this whole tidal wave, if you will. And the reason that I think this is important, and here's a chapter in the plan, is because there are three parts to the PA 490 program, the first of which is farm. And that, I think we all recognize what a farm is, and under the assessor is allowed to do this if you have farm-related income and meet other state criteria. So it's outside of our control, we can't do anything, and we hope that they take advantage of it because it makes farmland easier and cheaper to own. The next major category is called forest, and there's, again, state criteria for this, and the biggest one of which is it has to be at least 25 acres of property. And so how many properties do we have that are more than 25 acres and undeveloped? And there is a third category. The third category, unfortunately, is called the Open Space Assessment Program. But what it really is a local option assessment program. That if there are policies recommended in the POCD, the town can move ahead and adopt a policy or program by a legislative body. RTM would approve this ordinance change, if you will. So what it does is it offers a reduced assessment to people whose land meets that criteria. If it's not recommended in the POCD, it can't be done. If it is, it could. So the last plan recommended that it be considered, and we can carry that forward, and we can get more specific if we want. Then, again, I think...
Can I ask a question about that?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it says less than 25 acres, but there's no lower threshold, so people with a quarter of an acre...
No. This would exactly be the policy. So I believe Madison, for example, has the policy in place, and their policy applies to any land in town which is the lot or the parcel is bigger than 2 times the minimum lot size. So they're saying if this land has...
So they set the policy of what the size is.
And we would. The POCD has to set the policy, and then it gets acted on up the food chain in terms of that action.
So it would need to be that specific in the POCD?
I think we can paint broad parameters that wouldn't apply to a quarter acre. Or maybe it does apply to a quarter acre if it's in an area like Indian Neck or another place where that quarter acre, if it was waterfront or something else, would provide some sort of community benefit. So what are the criteria? It's considered to be local option. If there was a threat of land being developed and we wanted to try to encourage that to be undeveloped for longer, what might that be? Recognize there's an impact on the tax base. It's generally not huge, but again, it is a public policy option at our disposal. On the last page, it addresses other character issues, and this is concepts of light pollution and signage, and the impact that those can have. So we covered quite a gamut here in community character, from scenic views, etc. A number of these are touched on in the 2008 POCD. What's your thought process going forward? A reasonable framework for community character strategies? Anything missing? Too much? Take the LED sign out?
I'd like to see you had better definition in the commercial, industrial kinds of areas of what would make it less offensive, as opposed to just blanketly saying these are our sorries, you know. But,
No, and they're potentially,
encourage more tree line areas, and because we have a number of existing corridors, they're not going to go away, but how can we improve that to make them come up to par with the character of some of these other areas?
Yeah, and so I think there are issues. I think they were talked about earlier, for example, street trees and the difference that street trees can do. I think some communities have a design review process, so that as an application comes into planning and zoning, it would go to the design review process first and then come back with a recommendation. I worked in the development side of the industry for 7 or 8 years, and the thing I learned as part of that time period was I've never met an applicant who doesn't want an approval. And if you say to them that we're looking for sensitive building design that fits into the character of Brantford, we're not looking for Taj Mahals and the other stuff, but we're also not looking for metal buildings with...
Well, I think that's what I'm saying is, to be specific, to say no LED signs, no metal buildings, or, masonry fronted buildings, or sidewalks and
There are
trees.
good examples of what other communities have adopted there. So if in the POCD it recommended that this might be something to be investigated or pursued, we could add a sidebar that lists the communities that have design guidelines that we could use perhaps to kickstart our own process.
I think that's even more important than the process of the review is a depiction for potential developer of what the community is looking for.
Right.
How do we want this to look? You take your development and fit that into what the community is looking for.
And we talked about that a little bit with the transit-oriented development group as well, giving guidelines to some things.
And again, I think it's important to, this design review process is an advisory report that comes to the Planning and Zoning Commission. So if the design review board gets a little overzealous, if you will, in terms of their recommendations, the commission says, well, thank you very much, and they don't have to take them all. On the other hand, an applicant may now have refined the plans to maybe add a sloped roof or a dormer to soften something, and it makes a cupola, and it makes a world of difference on the building and really kind of softens its approach. Or they've changed the landscaping a little bit and opened up some key views. And this might be something beyond what, it might actually make the commission's job a little easier at times, because a lot of this stuff will have been worked beforehand, so food for thought.
But I know you do have a proactive recommendation. I don't know what the committee's take or opinion on that is. So you have page 6, number 2, under A2.
Yep.
Which actually definitively puts out there as a recommendation, establish a design review board and expand the design review process to areas outside the center. Is that something the committees, an alternative could be consider establishing, or have soften the language so that it's a recommendation is just to examine it rather than actually do it? And that depends on what the feeling is of the committee and the Planning and Zoning Commission ultimately.
I think that's a topic for quite a bit of discussion.
Yeah, there was such a hue and cry when the Stony Creek Design Review Committee came into Planning and Zoning. It's the focus of something like a design and review committee would have to be really specific. The entire scope issue of what they're, the people objecting to having someone else say what they could do with their own house, as opposed to what you're going to do with a major public construction, are really two different things. So if you're doing a major public construction, yes, you really want to have some design on it. What someone does with their house, it's private property. also the sort of fear of a design review is an overly homogenization of the design context. And it has the potential to reduce creativity and a whole lot of other kinds of expression that you would get that would make a unique, quirky, and vital architectural fabric. And as I've mentioned a few times before, we really need to start considering different types based on flood, shoreline rising and stuff like that. That the building typology that we are facing in Brantford is going to have to change over the next century. And we need to somehow anticipate that and ease into it. But I'm really leery whenever anybody says, well, we're going to get a design review committee. And that just, I get blinky.
So it sounds like that's a topic we could discuss further.
Yeah, I think
subsequent meeting. Absolutely.
Very definitely, because we have our Brantford Center review, which works quite well.
Right.
But it's primarily with commercial properties, not residential. And I think you're right that when you get into residential, people get a little.
Yeah. It depends on the section of town.
And it also depends on how it works. I mean, our commission in town is a kind of works with the developers versus laying down hard and fast rules a lot of times. So it depends. And I know Stony Creek has been to our meetings to sort of observe how we do it in town, and I think it's actually worked fairly well. So.
Okay.
So I think so that we can move on, I'm going to pull this one out as being an issue that's worthy of additional discussion, so hold that thought. The last booklet in the series today for discussion is a new little section in the plan, or some of the elements were listed in the plan before. And this has to do with the concepts of sustainability and resiliency. So sustainability is identified in the plan as being greener, if you will, in terms of energy usage and water conservation and solid waste and recycling and just trying to live in a more sort of sustainable way, and the plan would advocate for that. And then the concept of resiliency is this whole issue again of kind of at three levels, I think. It's about emergency response if there's a car accident or something else happens. It's hazard mitigation at the mid-level, and the town is working very effectively with the region in terms of hazard mitigation on a regular level to try to mitigate flooding and other things like that. And then even longer term, resiliency throws in the whole concept, for example, of coastal adaptation and whether we pull back. So the plan is not going to get overly detailed in these areas, but it's going to advocate for sustainability and resiliency going forward. Any thoughts on this one? Reasonable framework for moving forward? I think, Mr. Chairman, on the agenda, that brings us now to...
Brings us to open discussion.
So I think at this point in time, we've had a chance to listen, if you will, to the other groups. We've had a chance to talk through a basic framework, and if there's input and feedback from the community, we can add that into the next.
So right now, I think this is a good time to have some interaction between you folks. Anybody here who would like to speak, obviously have you come up to the microphone, but I think we can have a dialogue with the committee members at this time. So.
I think the only thing we'd ask, just in the interest of time, is if you keep it brief, and if you need more time, maybe let other people speak and then come back, etc. Just
we've got about a half an hour, so let's try to use our time well. Jeffrey.
I'm Jeff Clark. I live on Harbor Street, and I just have a suggestion. One, I looked for the minutes of your last meeting, and I did not find any on the town website. So I would please encourage you to post whatever minutes you're taking on the town website, specifically as it relates to the dates of future meetings, which I don't know if they're on the website anywhere, but I haven't found them. I don't know if you're subject to FOI or not. And the second request is I did send some correspondence and email to a few of you 2 or 3 weeks ago and never got an acknowledgement. So when I hear that other people in the audience have not received acknowledgements, I would encourage you to acknowledge anything you receive. That's it.
Just again, for people, the email address which I'm coordinating or trying to coordinate on your behalf is pocd@brantford-ct.gov. Anything that comes to me, I'm certainly copying to Harry, so, and I'm acknowledging the things I get. So apologize if you resend your stuff to that address, you'll hopefully get an acknowledgement and it'll be logged and we'll be good to go.
Just for the record, Jeff, before you sit down, we did get your email before the last meeting, and we did discuss it. It actually did come up for discussion. You talked about sidewalks going down, so, I mean, and it was well taken, so thank you for, no, but if we didn't respond, then we should be. Thanks.
I thought I'd make myself popular by not taking up too much time at the microphone, but there are a couple items I did want to talk about, and I'll take off my official hat as president of the Brantford Historical Society and speak as a private resident. I happen to live in one of the historic districts that's established in town. I think there were 6. I didn't count before I came out tonight. And I'm not leery of telling people that if you live in a historic district, you've moved into a historic district, it's been there for decades. If you're in that historic district and you want to put up something that's totally out of the character of that historic district, maybe you should think carefully before you, say, knock down an 1840s Greek revival and put up something with stucco and stainless steel wires and stuff like that. I can take anybody here to every historic district in Brantford and show you a house and you look at it and go, boy, that really doesn't belong here. And if you look at some of the towns that we think are the, I don't know if you want to call it quaint or most attractive towns along the Connecticut River Valley, you can name them, I won't call them out by name. They've done the best job of having that homogeneity of the development right there. They've told people, this is a town you live in. If you want to put up something that stands out, I'll use the term sore thumb, then maybe you ought to look outside a historic district or outside our town. That's all, thank you.
Hi, my name is Meg Kilgore and I live at Turtle Bay. I did send some information after that first meeting, and this is just to really repeat some of it because it hasn't been brought up today. And I appreciate your letting people come and share their comments. In the plan, it lists key strategy to protect water quality, which was defined to include the ecosystem and habitat of Long Island Sound. And to date, the storm drains are one of the main ways used as protection. That is helping, but another problem is runoff from all properties that are direct waterfront. When the owners use fertilizers and other lawn chemicals for things such as greener lawns and insect control, these products can be washed into the water from rainfall or lawn watering. And many of these products are toxic to aquatic life. My first suggestion is to stop the use of lawn products within 50 feet or some other defined distance of Long Island Sound, Brantford Harbor, Brantford River, Farm River, Queech Brook, and any other body of water that ultimately flows to Long Island Sound. My second suggestion, because plastic bags are ending up as trash everywhere, which is unsightly litter and dangerous to animals both in the water and on land, I strongly believe that Brantford should no longer allow the stores in Brantford to provide plastic bags to carry away their purchases. Instead, merchants could provide paper bags for a nominal charge, a few cents, for those who do not provide their own reusable shopping bags. And then a secondary strategy that is listed to utilize green energy. In the last 10 years, the cost of solar panels has decreased considerably so that they are more feasible economically. So I think that for new construction and major renovations of town buildings, commercial buildings, and existing residential housing in Brantford, that either solar panels or geothermal energy systems be required to meet each structure's energy needs. Having green sources of energy for Brantford buildings will improve air quality, which will lower rates of asthma and other breathing issues. And then the third thing I brought up is then another way to utilize green energy And B, an additional way to improve air quality is to incentivize purchase of hybrid cars and totally electric vehicles. The incentive in this case could be for Brantford to use at least a slightly lower annual tax rate on these vehicles. Thank you.
My name is Lauren Brown. I'm addressing community character. I've been really struck by comments from the November 29th meeting and also notes in the booklet about West Main Street. There seems to be a pretty broad consensus that West Main Street is not an asset to community character. So in the POCD, I fervently hope that there'll be strong recommendations that planning and zoning do all they can to prevent the proliferation of West Main Street type development, specifically to East Main Street. And development can happen, but it doesn't have to set us backwards in terms of community character. Thank you. And unrelated, I'd just like to say something about the Stony Creek Village District. I'm not speaking as a member of the association or the board or anything, just as a resident and observations. I would just say that so far it's been untested. I think there's only been one application. It just, it remains to be seen how it will work out.
Hello. My name is Kate Galambos. I live in the Brushy Plain area, which is underrepresented today, I think. Just quickly on the plastic bags, it has been shown that for municipalities that implement a plastic bag ban, it is possible to get money for that, to get income through taxes or through fees for when people use plastic bags. So it's actually an income generator potentially for the town. I would like to speak about the butterflies and the bees. This is to follow up on the letter that I did submit already. To me, when we think about these three categories, open space, natural habitat, and sustainability, they kind of all go together. And I would love it if we could find a way in this town to merge those categories together in terms of how to protect and help to sustain the bees and the butterflies. So for example, reforestation and management of land, and that could be open space or it could be town land or vacant land, by widespread planting of milkweed so that the monarch butterflies will be able to feed there. That would be a forward-thinking approach for our town to take in terms of preservation of the butterflies going forward into the next 10 years. Also, people have spoken about pesticides. There are pesticides that are especially harmful to bees and butterflies, and I think that the town and the POCD should really look at pesticides as being one of the components that are discussed. And finally, you can support the pollinators, in other words, the bees, by providing safe habitats for the pollinators. So, as I said in my letter, this may seem far-fetched, but I ask, if not now, when? How can our town, through our POCD, put into place actions that will help to support these habitat going forward? Thank you.
Hi, I'm Robin Comey. I'm a 3rd District RTN rep and also board member of the Short Beach Civic Association. And it just hit me when you were speaking about the coastal booklet and you talked about engaging neighborhood associations into helping with some of the framework building in with the sea level rise and maintaining some of the streets or properties. I would just say that when you do start considering writing the framework, that you keep in mind that across town we have an equity of services issue, and that maybe our Short Beach or other areas of town may have less resources based on everything from population to property values. and then say a Pine Orchard or Stony Creek. So I would just make sure that that's all taken into consideration, and that when those plans are coming to fruition.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jeannie Hughes. I want to just mention something regarding town character, and being that Brantford is what I would call a smaller coastal New England town, and it seemed like it was very important to residents to maintain that character. I'd like everybody to think about the building of the new middle school, and that building looks, from the plans, looks like it's more appropriate for an urban environment than it is for our small coastal New England town of Brantford. It is a 3-story building with mechanicals on the roof, which would make it kind of like a 4-story building. And in an area where there's historic homes immediately in front of it, immediately behind it, and it just doesn't seem fitting for the area. It's too high for the neighborhood and too high for the town. Dr. Hernandez at a meeting had said, well, there's a precedent for a 3-story building, school building in the town being the Sliney School, but that building is really 3 stories only in the backside where the land slopes away. It was also built at a time where there was very large factories within 2 blocks of the building. So I just think that that's something that should be addressed. It has not been built yet. There's time to change the plans to make it more in character with the town. The Sliney School itself is still, after 90 years, still a very appropriate building for the town. It really fits in. The Adams Middle School in Guilford is a beautiful old building. It still has so much character for the town, so I would like the town to consider that. Another point I want to make about just economic development in general is that our mill rate now in Brantford is actually higher than Madison, and not by much, but Madison is not pushing economic development constantly. It is, they really have been, holding back development. People don't want the development, and their mill rate is a little bit less than ours now. So I think we should keep that in mind too. Just because we think it's going to increase our tax base, it really doesn't seem to work out that way. Thank you.
Anyone else?
My name is Heather Wells Sweeney, and I encourage the town and the committees to encourage incentives, especially for new constructions, to decrease impervious surface and increase pervious surface. That would have the benefit of taking some load off of the infrastructure that would allow the stormwater to be dealt with in situ on site. There is a variety of options for doing that. Rain gardens, holding tanks, and the paving surfaces could all reduce stormwater runoff and improve our water quality, and perhaps have a positive economic benefit as well. Thank you.
Anyone else like to say a few words?
I'd love to, but I'm going to call me.
Okay. Board members, anybody else have anything?
I think I have one, is the format of the meeting and the booklets, there's another listening session 2 weeks and 2 weeks after that. Is this format of booklets and meetings going to work for us?
I think so.
Okay.
Yep.
I think at this point in time, our schedule of coming meetings is essentially 2 weeks from today on January 24th. We'll be talking about development-related topics.
Mm-hmm.
And so those booklets will be in Harry's hands in about a week, and so you'll get them email booklets, etc., in advance of the meeting to review. The following meeting, our listening session on February 7th, will be on infrastructure-related topics. That includes community facilities, vehicular transportation, bicycle, pedestrian, utilities, transit, those types of issues. We've tentatively reserved a possible additional meeting night at the end of February for topics that we're carrying over that might be a little bit more meaty, et cetera. So if we were following our Wednesday meeting schedule, that would be the 21st, but I think Harry thinks that the fire department's available perhaps the 22nd. So if we get to that point that we decide to hold that meeting, I think we've held both rooms here and there, and if we decide to hold the meeting, then we can pick the date and location.
But it'd be most helpful if the committee had a consensus you could share with us about having that meeting or not, then we, and particularly the date, we can release one of the meeting rooms. So I think, I mean, my recommendation would be the 22nd at the firehouse. I think it's easier for TV coverage of it, particular, and it just lends itself, you know, I think a little more
And this,
easily to this kind of
the audio visual is a lot better over there too. Yeah.
This is like Charlie Brown's teacher.
Yeah.
I don't have anything else, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much.
Okay. Anybody else on the committee have anything?
We've heard a number of people tonight talking about having sent materials in.
Yeah.
And it'd be really great if those could be distributed to the committee.
I know we got some of them, but
I think that we have. I think our policy has been that based on our discussion with the commission earlier, the material that came in before the meeting, we were going to try to have for you at the meeting so that you kept up to date. But as I observed people's communication tonight, I'm trying to remember, yeah, I remember seeing that, where was it? So I think maybe if we create an index, if you will, or a log book, people can see that their correspondence has been received, and then the commission will know that for each meeting, this is item 17 through 22 on the list, you got it on this date. So that just in terms of our own record keeping and stuff, it'll be transparent.
And do we have some kind of a email response when people send something in? They automatically get a confirmation.
It's been kind of ad hoc. I mean, I think you've been responding.
Are you getting copied on the POCD?
I am.
Okay, so I'm treating it as it's an email to me. I thank the respondent for their submittal, and then I've been copying Harry. And the main purpose, again, is to make sure that in terms of a central repository and copy making, that we do have a complete list. So I'll work with Harry and Rich, we'll go back and reassemble what we've got, create a log of correspondence. I think we can post that on the town website, and people can say, hey, it doesn't seem like they logged my letter, and then we can track that down and make sure we have it.
Okay.
And then acknowledgement of receipt.
Yes, I've been doing that.
Okay, great.
Anybody else have anything that was a good point, Phil?
A question. Particularly related to coastal resources and sea level rise and things like that. That's an issue that I pay attention to a lot, and so I come across interesting articles. I've been sending them to Harry and to Glenn, but I'm wondering if it's perhaps more efficient to just shoot them out to everybody on the committee, if people would like that. I don't have everybody's email, so I would need, there are a couple people who I don't have emails for, so.
Yeah, I think we, I want to say we talked about
I know
this
there was
last
one
meeting.
that we all got.
Yeah, I mean, one thing we could do is, and I think we talked about this last meeting, was sort of gang up everything that comes in and get it to you at one time, which we were going to do, I think, the week before the meeting, and just shoot that out at that point. Does that sound?
Yeah, I think that's the same thing. I think we were just talking about the log the stuff in. So, Bill, everything that you've sent over, I've been going through so that I can summarize, if you will, for them. So I think we should treat those types of things as correspondence that actually gets onto the list, even if it's just here. For example, I think it was yesterday or today we got the link to the Connecticut Mirror article. Bingo. So I mean, the issue is it's right there in the correspondence. It's very informative. So maybe it's just the email saying here's the link, or maybe it's the article itself. I'll work that out with Harry.
Okay.
Okay.
Do we have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Go move.
Second.
Second.
All in favor? Thank you all.
The preceding program was brought to you through the support of the Town of Brantford. Watch town meetings or other videos on demand at BrantfordTV.org.